Hello everyone, this is a discussion video intended for Psychology 101N or Introduction to Psychology. So let's understand first the etymology of the word psychology. The Greek word psyche means soul. The word psychology was coined at a time when the concepts of soul and mind were not as clearly distinguished. The root ology denotes the scientific study of. Therefore, when combined, psychology refers to the scientific study of the mind. Since science studies only observable phenomena and the mind is not directly observable, we expand this definition to the scientific study of mind and behavior. The scientific study of any aspect of the world uses the scientific method to acquire knowledge. To apply the scientific method, a researcher with a question about how or why something happens will propose a tentative explanation called a hypothesis to explain the phenomenon. So in general, science deals only with matter and energy, that is, those things that can be measured. And it cannot arrive at knowledge about values and morality. This is one reason why our scientific understanding of the mind is so limited, since thoughts, at least as we experience them, are neither matter nor energy. A scientific method is also a form of empiricism. An empirical method for acquiring knowledge is one based on observation, including experimentation, rather than a method based only on forms of logical argument or previous authorities. Often, students take their first psychology course because they are interested in helping others and want to learn more about themselves and why they act the way they do. Sometimes students take a psychology course because it is either satisfies a general education requirement or is required for a program of studies such as nursing or pre-med. Many of these students develop such an interest in the area that they go on to declare psychology as their major. An education in psychology is valuable for a number of reasons. Psychology students hone critical thinking skills and are trained in the use of the scientific method. Critical thinking is the active application of a set of skills to information for the understanding and evaluation of that information. The evaluation of information, which is assessing its reliability and usefulness, is an important skill in a world full of competing facts, many of which are designed to be misleading. Psychology students also can develop better communication skills during the course of their undergraduate coursework. Together, these factors increase students' scientific literacy and prepare students to critically evaluate the various sources of information they encounter. In addition to these broad-based skills, psychology students come to understand the complex factors that shape one's behavior. They appreciate the interaction of our biology, our environment, and our experiences in determining who we are and how we will behave. They learn about basic principles that guide how we think and behave, and they come to recognize the tremendous diversity that exists across individuals and across cultural boundaries. This section will provide an overview of the shifts in paradigms that have influenced psychology from Wundt and James through today. Wilhelm Wundt was a German scientist who was the first person to be referred to as a psychologist. He created the first laboratory for psychological research and viewed psychology as a scientific study of conscious experience. And he believed that the goal of psychology was to identify components of consciousness and how those components combined to result in our conscious experience. William James was the first American psychologist who espoused a different perspective on how psychology should operate. James was introduced to Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection and accepted it as an explanation of an organism's characteristics. As James saw it, psychology's purpose was to study the function of behavior in the world, and as such, his perspective was known as functionalism. The most influential and well known figure in psychology's history was Sigmund Freud. In Freud's view, the unconscious mind was a repository of feelings and urges of which we have no awareness. Gaining access to the unconscious then was crucial to the successful resolution of the patient's problems. According to Freud, the unconscious mind could be accessed through dream analysis by examinations of the first words that came to people's minds and through seemingly innocent slips of the tongue. One of his many books, A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis, shared his ideas about psychoanalytic therapy. Freud's ideas were influential, and you will learn more about them when you study lifespan development, personality, and therapy. For instance, many therapists believe strongly in the unconscious and the impact of early childhood experiences on the rest of a person's life. Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, and Wolfgang Collier are credited with introducing psychologists in the United States to various Gestalt principles. The major emphasis of Gestalt psychology deals with the fact that although a sensory experience can be broken down into individual parts, how those parts relate to each other as a whole is often what the individual responds to in perception. Ivan Pavlov studied a form of learning behavior called a conditioned reflex, in which an animal or human produced a reflex response to a stimulus and over time was conditioned to produce the response to a different stimulus that the experimenter associated with the original stimulus. Pavlov's classical conditioning is only one form of learning behavior studied by behaviorists. John B. Watson was an influential American psychologist whose most famous work occurred during the early 20th century. Watson was a major proponent of shifting the focus of psychology from the mind to behavior. And this approach of observing and controlling behavior came to be known as behaviorism. Behaviorism dominated experimental psychology for several decades, and its influence can still be felt today. Behaviorism is mainly responsible for establishing psychology as a scientific discipline through its objective methods and especially experimentation. In addition, it is used in behavioral and cognitive behavioral therapy. Behavior modification is commonly used in classroom settings. Behaviorism has also led to research on environmental influences on human behavior. B.F. Skinner was an American psychologist like Watson. Oh, no? So Skinner was a behaviorist and he concentrated on how behavior was affected by its consequences. Therefore, Skinner spoke of reinforcement and punishment as major factors in driving behavior. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who is best known for proposing a hierarchy of human needs in motivating behavior. Although this concept will be discussed in more detail in a later chapter, a brief overview will be provided here. So Maslow asserted that so long as basic needs necessary for survival were met, such as food, water, shelter, higher level needs, such as social needs, would begin to motivate behavior. Carl Rogers was also an American psychologist, and Rogers used a therapeutic technique known as client centered therapy in helping his clients deal with the problematic issues that resulted in their seeking psychotherapy. Unlike a psychoanalytic approach in which the therapist plays an important role in interpreting what conscious behavior reveals about the unconscious mind, client centered therapy involves the patient taking a lead role in the therapy session. The APA, or American Psychological Association, is a professional organization representing psychologists in the United States. The APA is the largest organization of psychologists in the world, and its mission is to advance and disseminate psychological knowledge for the betterment of people. Now we will be discussing the different areas of psychology. Let's start with biopsychology. Biopsychology explores how our biology influences our behavior. But biopsychology typically focuses on the immediate causes of behavior based on the physiology of humans or another animals. Sensation and perception research is also quite interdisciplinary. So imagine walking between buildings as you move from one class to another. So you are inundated with sights, sounds, touch, sensations, and smells. So you also experience the air temperature around you and maintain your balance as you make your way. So these are all factors of interest to someone working in the domain of sensation and perception. Cognitive psychology is an area of psychology that focuses on studying cognitions or thoughts and their relationship to our experiences and our actions. So, cognitive psychologists have research interests that span a spectrum of topics ranging from attention to problem solving to language and to memory. So, developmental psychology is the scientific study of development across a lifespan. So, developmental psychologists are interested in processes related to physical maturation. However, their focus is not limited to the physical changes associated with aging, as they also focus on changes in cognitive skills. Uh, it's also part of moral reasoning, social behavior, and other psychological attributes. So, developmental psychologists focus primarily on changes that occurred through reaching adulthood providing enormous insight into the differences in physical, cognitive, and social capacities that exist between very young children and adults. Personality psychology focuses on patterns of thoughts and behaviors that make each individual unique. Several individuals, such as Freud and Maslow, that we have already discussed in our historical overview of psychology, and the American psychologist Gordon Allport contributed to early theories of personality. These early theorists attempted to explain how an individual's personality develops from his or her given perspective. Social psychology focuses on how we interact with and relate to others. So social psychologists conduct research on a wide variety of topics that include differences in how we explain our behavior versus how we explain the behavior of others. This also includes prejudice and attraction and how we resolve interpersonal conflicts. So, social psychologists have also sought to determine how being among other people changes our own behavior and our patterns of thinking. Industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology, is a subfield of psychology that applies psychological theories, principles, and research findings in industrial and organizational settings. IO psychologists are often involved in issues related to personnel management, rather, organizational structure, and workplace environment. Businesses often seek the aid of IO psychologists to make the best hiring decisions, as well as to create an environment that results in high levels of employee productivity and efficiency. Health psychology focuses on how health is affected by the interaction of biological, psychological, and social cultural factors. Health psychologists are interested in helping individuals achieve better health through public policy, education, intervention, and research. So, health psychologists might conduct research that explores the relationship between one's genetic makeup, patterns of behavior, relationships, psychological stress, and health. They may research effective ways to motivate people to address patterns of behavior that contribute to poorer health. Sport and exercise psychology is a study of the psychological aspects of sport performance, including motivation and performance anxiety, and the effects of sport on mental and emotional well being. Research is also conducted on similar topics as they relate to physical exercise in general. The discipline also includes topics that are broader than sport and exercise, but that are related to interactions between mental and physical performance under demanding conditions such as firefighting, military operations, artistic performance, and surgery. Clinical psychology is the area of psychology that focuses on diagnosing and treating psychological disorders and other problematic patterns of behavior. It is generally considered a more applied area within psychology. However, some clinicians are also actively engaged in scientific research. Counseling psychology is a similar discipline that focuses on emotional, social, vocational, and health-related outcomes in individuals who are considered psychologically healthy. It also focuses on how people function both personally and in their relationships at all ages. So, counseling psychology addresses the emotional, social, work, school, and physical health concerns people that may have at different stages in their lives, that focusing on typical life stresses and more severe issues with which people may struggle as individuals and as a part of families, groups, and organizations. Counseling psychologists help people with physical, emotional, and mental health issues and improve their sense of well being, alleviate feelings of distress, and resolve crisis. They also provide assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of more severe psychological symptoms. Forensic psychology is a branch of psychology that deals questions of psychology as they arise in the context of the justice system. So, for example, forensic psychologists and forensic psychiatrists will assess a person's competency to stand trial and assess the state of mind of the defendant and act as consultants on child custody cases, consult on sentencing and treatment recommendations, and also advise on issues such as eyewitnesses, testimony, and children's testimony. So there are many different options available to psychology degree holders depending on your specializations and interests. So you can see there, you can go through specializations such as psychologist, psychotherapist, social worker, counselor, educational psychologist, human resource manager, teacher, research roles, and media roles. So as you can see there, the highest percentage of people who graduated in psychology works in the education and health sector. These are teachers, psychologists, guidance counselors, psychotherapists, and social workers. Here in the Philippines, if you want to practice the mentioned careers in psychology, most of them require at least a master's degree and a PRC license to practice your profession. Again, psychology is a broad field and there are a lot of opportunities for sure to choose from. So what area of specializations are you most interested in is up to you. Then focus on molding your skills for professional growth. So that ends my presentation. So if you have questions or clarifications, feel free to contact me on my UB Facebook account. So thank you so much for being so attentive.